forgot my book. This House is now resumed.
So, Deputy Speaker, recommittal of papers. Minister Strong?
Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am commanded to lay the Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries' Remuneration and Allowances Order 2022.
Recommittal of government notices.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I beg to give notice of a resolution to grant the sum of $45,536,691 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2021-22 as shown in supplementary estimates number 9, 2021-22. With it.
Government business resumed, sir. Order number 5, in the name of the Honourable Leader of the House, to move that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee to consider the grant of sums of money for the service of this island. We go into committee.
Yeah, right. I just want to make sure to really work. Yes. Thank you. Beg to move that you do not leave the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee.
Beg to second that, sir.
My issue.
The question is that it do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself in Standard Finance Committee. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. All against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
This House is now in Standing Finance Committee.
Mr. Chairman, Head 27, Ministry of Tourism and International Transport, in the amount of $4,486,545.
The Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise to support the appropriation of these monies under Head 27, specifically, sir, because the monies here relate to the caves of Barbados, which, as you are aware, Mr. Chairman, relates to some of the money in terms of the servicing of the loan which was borrowed from the Caribbean Development Bank. The government of Barbados advanced the monies under this arrangement to be able to pay these debts, as is usually the case, and certainly with respect to ensuring that we maintain our record with respect to settlement of debt. We have done so. This supplementary now is just to bring to account, sir, those monies that were advanced specifically to deal with that. And to the extent, sir, that we are still in the process, certainly, of recovering from COVID-19. I know that there are wonderful plans with respect to the management of the cave going forward and the expansion of additional investment and activities within the context of the area. We are confident now that having repositioned the management of the cave, that Barbadians alike as well as visitors will have a much broader set of experiences with their interactions with Harrison Cave, and therefore we are honoring our commitment as a government with respect to the arrangements already in place, and therefore these monies are to bring those monies to account. With respect to the other element, Mr. Chairman, for some time, we have been contemplating, sir, how we engage with respect to, and as Barbadians will be aware, we own, in effect, sir, the Hilton Hotel. The hotel is managed under a specific arrangement with Hilton International, and therefore we've sought very clearly to renegotiate the specific arrangement between the government and people of Barbados and the management of the Hilton Hotel, and therefore the other sums of monies as requested here relate to covering the legal fees with respect to being able to manage that renegotiating process. Both of these elements, sir, would relate to, in a sense, the extent to which taxpayers' investment over time will see a greater return, and therefore consistent with how we have been re-engineering and reforming our processes across government. These two specific entities in relation to, one, how, on the one hand, Harrison Cave is managed, but equally too, sir, with respect to the management and operation of the Hilton Hotel, are intended to ensure then that there are greater returns back to the taxpayer by having expanded opportunity for Barbadians, see greater management, if you like, sir, with respect to how these resources are managed, so that over the course of time that we will see a greater return on our investment with respect to the management of these entities. So with those very few words, sir, I beg to move that Head 27 stand part.
Second that, sir. The question is?
Yeah, you can speak on this. Huh?
Honourable Member for St. Michael East.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, for considerable time, I've been wondering if when we hear about the expenditure in relation to the cave, Harrison Cave, which has brought substantial sum of revenue to Barbados, and then I hear I'm now hearing the call for a supplementary to even further make sure that the business and the function of the cave is sustained. I'm just trying to find out if it's a mythology or if I am really involved in fantasy. After hearing for a considerable period of time, probably over a decade, many people that live and own land within the area of the cave on intervals would complain about the government owing them money for their land. I don't know, I don't believe that the land was resolved, the purchasing of the land was resolved by any direct negotiation with the owners of the land there. So I'm assuming that the area of the land around there came into the government's hand as a consequence of using compulsory acquisition in the circumstances. Is there any truth that there are ordinary people that own land on the top of the cave and around the cave, and the government has not fulfilled its obligation to these people? Is it a mythology, is it a misunderstanding by ordinary people, or what is happening? I think it's a very uncomfortable position when we continue to talk in this manner, and the general public and the ordinary people who claim to be landowners around or on top of the cave is still approaching members of parliament, certainly myself and some that were here before, asking when is the government going to pay them for the use of the land that they have. That's all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I give the honourable member some assurance that I will follow up on his question, but suffice it to say, Mr. Chair, that the government certainly in entering into the arrangement with the new operator of the cave, Chaka Caribbean, that I know there were extensive consultations with respect to engaging the wider community in the build-out of the investment and opportunities within there, and therefore I undertake to respond to the honourable member at the appropriate time with his queries. Specifically though, just to be clear, this specific loan came into being in 2007, Mr. Chair. The agreement was signed on February 14th, Valentine's Day, actually 2007, Mr. Chair, and therefore this is part of the government's guarantee with respect to the process of the Caves of Barbados resolving that debt from the Caribbean Development Bank. And so, Mr. Chair, if those favors beg to move that head 27 stand part.
The question is that head 27 stand apart. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, Head 30, Attorney General, in the amount of $10,202,750.
Honourable member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Chairman. The supplementary request for the Office of the Attorney General is multifaceted. I promise not to take you on too much of an excursion this morning. We have requested, and the largest single amount is a sum of $4,609,888.92 that is requested to pay salaries, allowances, and so on. And without going into too much of a long discourse, I think it is important that I give both the Parliament and also the country an indication of some of the challenges that have beset the Barbados Police Service, which would require these kinds of amounts to be provided for. Mr. Chairman, one of the things that we have not generally talked about has been the impact of COVID. And I know COVID is being seen as the panacea for just about anything that happens to derail the proper running of government, but I think it is important to mention it in this context. We have maintained a very secure and stable environment in Barbados because of the hard work of our police officers. But it is not so readily recognized that from time to time we've had tremendous challenges keeping boots on the ground because of COVID. There were times, Mr. Chairman, during the course of this financial year that we've had, and I don't even mean at the beginning, I'm talking about even recently, we've had as many as 60 and 70 police officers in isolation. In isolation, sir. That is more than 5% of the Barbados, of the total employment numbers of the Barbados Police Service. And this then has ramifications because we don't dare tell the country we cannot put boots on the ground because people are in isolation because of COVID. And then when you have people in isolation, sir, we've also had similar numbers in quarantine. So there have been periods of time, Mr. Chairman, when we could have had and did have as much as 10% or more of our force, of our service, being unavailable to work. But we can't close a station. There are places in Barbados, Mr. Chairman, when COVID hit, you will see a sign in the papers or on social media. This business is closed for the next week. This business is closed for the next 2 weeks because of an outbreak of COVID. We've had businesses, supermarkets, all kinds of enterprises closed. The Barbados Police Service, much like the QUH and other places, cannot close. We still have to put people there. So invariably, Mr. Chairman, what would happen is that Police Officer Kerry Simmons would complete his round of duty, but then be told he can't go home. Can't go home because we got 70, 80, 90 people in isolation or in quarantine. So you got to stay on and do additional work. These are things that, you know, we don't talk about them, but they are the harsh realities that our law enforcement officers have to face. So, Mr. Chair, it is important for us to acknowledge and to thank the members of the Barbados Police Service, and please afford me the opportunity to do so on this occasion, to thank them for working tirelessly and unfailingly during this COVID pandemic. It has disrupted their family lives, it has disrupted their domestic arrangements, it has disrupted much of what the rest of us take for granted. They don't get the chance to say, no, I am not coming. So, sir, this largest chunk of just over $10 million is required to make sure that we're able to satisfy our financial obligations to the members of the service in terms of overtime, in terms of allowances, and in terms of their other requirements. We also have an obligation to pay them, sir, in relation to travel allowance. The amount voted for travel allowance is insufficient to process the payments that are required for the end of the financial year, and we therefore are seeking supplemental provision in the amount of $204,000 so as to be able to deal with that. Utilities, sir, requires supplemental provision for an additional $500,000. And then, of course, the supplies and materials. We've, of course, And if you think about it, Mr. Chairman, a police patrol goes on duty, they go into the same police station. Now, a school closes at the end of the day. Most government institutions will close at 4:30 and people go home. A police station does not close. A shift leaves and a shift comes on. We have to make sure that we have the requisite number of masks. We have to make sure that we have adequate sanitizer, adequate cleaning materials and so on, in order to be able to, and PPE, in order to be able to safeguard the health of our hardworking police officers. So because of the special requirements of COVID, Mr. Chairman, we now find ourselves in a position where we have insufficient funds to purchase hand sanitizers and things of that sort. We also need additional provision for the maintenance of our animals, the dogs and the horses of the Barbados Police Service. We have a significant amount, Mr. Chairman, the amount of $1.08 million, which is required to deal with petroleum products and the purchase of spare parts for police vehicles. Again, Mr. Chairman, when we drive home at the end of the day, we park our vehicles and it stays there until we decide to leave home again, often on the next day, sometimes 2 days after. A police vehicle never stops working. A patrol on a shift brings that vehicle back to the station, the next shift comes in and takes up that same police vehicle and hits the road again. A police vehicle works 24 hours of every single day of the year. And we have a serious maintenance program in place, but the fact of the matter is that it requires a tremendous amount of resources to keep our rolling stock there. And again, sir, we have to also factor in the extraordinary requirements of COVID. Because rather than just policing for the normal purposes of law and order, our police officers, our police service has had to be there to supplement the hard work of the COVID unit, and therefore we require a rather large amount of money to be able to make provision for the purchase of petroleum products and spare parts. And that has nothing to do with the increases from time to time of gasoline and things of that sort. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, it is a significant amount of money that we're asking for by way of supplementary, but none of it, sir, is to be taken as any reflection on any poor management on the part of the service. We have managed every cent carefully. Every cent carefully. But the fact is that circumstances have prevailed which have required us to force officers to work extra duties and things of that sort, and therefore we must now ensure that their reasonable requests in terms of money for remuneration is available to them. And with those words, sir, I beg to move that the supplementary provision requested under Head 30 stand part.
The question is that Head 30 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 31, sir. Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology in the amount of $2,567,583.
Honourable member for St. Michael North.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Not to delay the House, it's a very simple request. Under Head 31, we are seeking the amount of $2,567,583. This is, sir, to assist us with the renewal of licenses, specifically as it relates to our national digital, pardon me? My mic is big green light is on. Thank you. The amount being requested, sir, relates specifically to the renewal of some licenses for software and application services related to our national digital ID. Mr. Chairman, throughout the last few weeks of our estimates and budget discussions and debates, we have had several opportunities to speak about the upcoming national ID, the movement from the existing ID card into a more secure and digital format. And this has been a project that has been in the works for several months. Because of the digital aspect and component to the card, there are several applications and several software licenses that we have already engaged. And we are at that point where we need to now renew those licenses. So the amount that is being requested in this supplementary is specifically related to the renewal of those licenses. So therefore, with those few words, Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the supplementary amount of $2,567,583 stand part.
The question is that head 31 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Honorable members against, please say nay. He thinks the ayes have it.
Head 39, Ministry of International Business and Industry, in the amount of $292,000.
Honorable member for St. James Central.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Chairman. This is a relatively simple matter about which I need not delay the House. The request here is that the sum of $292,000 should be approved under this head. It is for the costs associated with additional posts of analysts, the regrading and reclassification of senior analyst to senior compliance officer, and acting allowances which are due as a result of the creation of a Global Business Review Task Force. Might I just say, for the benefit of lending a little bit of clarity to all of that, sir, is that this arises as a result of certain steps that have to be taken by the Division of International Business with regard to making sure that Barbados continues to meet its exchange of information for tax purposes requirements, and to do those things that we need to do with regard to the further requirements with regard to notice of beneficial ownership of the interest of companies registered to function in this country. By extension, we have, as part of that Global Business Review Task Force body of work, created a compliance unit within the Division of International Business. That is putting us in a position where, in fact, as early as Monday morning, the representatives of the OECD will be here in Barbados to spend the better part of next week on the ground doing an assessment of the state of play with regard to a number of the critical agencies, the functioning of the BRA, the functioning of the anti-money laundering unit, the functioning, sir, of the financial services body, and the international business unit, which of course has oversight for the corporate trust and service providers and all of the work that they must do to make sure that they are keeping this country's professionals, whether it be the attorneys, the accountants, etc., up to speed with regard to their requirements and making sure that those requirements are in fact being met. So that, sir, this is, as I said, a very simple matter. It is just to put that small sum of money at the disposal of the ministry so as to facilitate the reclassification of the senior analyst and the senior compliance officer, and to allow for the acting allowances to be paid for those people who have been working very hard. I am obliged to you, sir. I would wish to move that this head stand part.
The question is that head 39 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 81, Ministry of Transport, Works and Water Resources, in the amount of $7 million.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy, Mr. Chairman.
Honorable member for St. Michael Southeast.
Thank you. In moving this head, the sum of $7 million is requested under Head 81 for the Ministry of Transport, Works and Water Resources. The first provision relates to the provision of traffic and street lighting, which I know, Mr. Chairman, is of concern for almost all members across constituencies, and I believe all Barbadians. I'm constantly being requested to provide lighting in areas that are not adequately lit. We are working feverishly to try to address those issues, but there have been some outstanding balances owed to the Barbados Light and Power, which we've been trying to resolve. The other thing is that we've been looking at just making sure that we actually know which lights across the country are actually working, so that when the billing is done, we know that we're actually paying for what we are getting. So I'm mindful that there are, again, a number of requests as the society obviously is developing, as we have more developments, there's obviously the additional requests. But this particular sum of $4 million is basically to assist us in being able to bring down the amount that is owed to the Barbados Light and Power, and to be able to, again, start to have a balance that would allow us to continue to improve the lighting across the country. In relation to the other head, which relates to the Transport Board, I think it's fair to say that throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, we would have seen, as a result of the various restrictions, a number of the operators in terms of Transport Board being unable to reach full capacity. We have obviously finally been able to get back to that capacity, but it has not been without challenges for the board in relation to collecting revenue, because reduced ridership obviously has a direct impact in relation to being able to collect the revenue that is required. This particular amount, and I know that there are some concerns out there regarding the non-payments or the late payments at this point in terms of the salaries and wages for our workers, and this amount is intended to be able to help us to cover the salaries and operating expenditure for the board up to the end of the financial year. So the sum of $3 million is required to cover those costs. We are also in the process, and I'll just state for the record, obviously there are other ministries that the Transport Board provides their buses to be able to facilitate persons moving, whether it's the Ministry of Education, whether it is the Ministry of Community Empowerment, persons with disabilities, and therefore, as you can appreciate, as all entities and all ministries have been trying to find that perfect balance in meeting expenditure, obviously at times we've not been collecting the revenue from those ministries as well. So it really requires us now that we are back up and open to be able to apply some pressure to the ministries, and certainly the Ministry of Finance, to ensure that the Transport Board is able to stabilize its position and to be able to provide the ridership to the public of Barbados in a timely manner as well. So, Mr. Chair, with those few words, I beg to move that Head 81 do now stand part.
The question is that Head 81 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 82, sir. Ministry of Environment and National Beautification, in the amount of $6,920,507.
Honorable member for Christchurch West Central.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, sir. I don't have to over-elaborate today, but just to say the evidence is there for everyone in Barbados to see that we are finally becoming the beautiful state that we ought to be. So the money being asked for is to ensure that the salaries at the NCC, those salaries that would pay those workers who work assiduously to beautify and to clean and green this country, that they have a salary so that they can be able to take care of themselves and their families, and to pay as well some gratuities that we would have owed some of those workers as well. And the other set of monies, Mr. Chair, is support the efforts of those who are working to build the Concept Bay facility, a facility that will have a revetment that ensures that the abuse that we are having from the waves in a natural way, that we can protect the shoreline, a slipway to ensure, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, sir, that the boats, when we are under the threats of hurricanes and other surges, that the fishermen will be able to haul out their boats in a safe and timely manner, and a boat yard facility where that we will be able to facilitate repairs, much needed repairs for those boats in a pristine and fit for purpose environment. And lastly, Mr. Chair, sir, the other monies is to be spent to ensure that the fishermen have their longed-for fishing recreational facility, a facility that will allow those fishermen not only to recreate and launch in an area that is of the best making, but to allow for persons to be having all the facilities, the technological facilities, computer facilities. They will have a kitchen. And Mr. Chair, sir, I know you understand what is good old country food in a rustic environment. So, Mr. Chair, sir, it is to really enhance the facilities at Concept Bay, and I know the Honourable Member for St. John will be able to add his red flag to this vote. So, with those few words, Mr. Chair, sir, I move that Head 82 in the amount of $6,920,507 stand power.
Honourable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to thank the former minister for triggering this and the current minister for seeing it through. Just in a couple of sentences, Chair, this facility was in a state of disrepair for probably more than 30 years. Same building. The fishermen at Concept Bay are now operating out of two rusty 20-feet containers. And I'm suggesting that this particular development will augur well for the area. I know that it is an area that we're looking to develop in terms of probably having a tourist attraction at the location. So I am fully supporting this particular supplementary because it will benefit all of those fishermen and the others that ply their trade at Concept Bay. It is a clear indication, as I've constantly been saying, that this government is proactive and that we're doing what is necessary in order to ensure that every single person get that share of the pie. And it contributes to the fact that St. John is rising. Let us never, ever forget that. So I want to thank the Honourable Member for this, and I look forward to the start of this particular situation. I'm obliged.
Thanks, Honourable Member for St. John. I therefore move that Head 82 stand power.
The question is that Head 82 stand apart. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it. Honourable Member for St.
Head 87, sir. The Ministry of Education, Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training in the amount of $8,567,306.
Member for St. Philip West, you wish to join us on Zoom, you may so now make your presentation. Honourable member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I will try my best to I'll try my best to substitute for the honourable member for St. Philip West. I'll try my best. Mr. Chairman, and just for the avoidance of any doubt at all, because I suspect the members of the public hearing this debate may get a little concerned. As it relates to salaries, not just in relation to this head, but certainly all of the other heads that have come before, I just want to make it clear that public servants have been paid. During the normal course of the year, whether it is from the statutory vote or the other personal emoluments, sir, from time to time, as the AG would have indicated in his instance, obviously depending on which officers work, obviously will determine the value of allowances. So what is allowed in the system, just for absolute clarity, is that obviously officers will be paid. What we are doing here today is simply to account for the fact that there may have been variations throughout the year across the various heads, and therefore we are just bringing to account what has happened with respect to the various votes by each ministry. I've asked the budget section, Mr. Speaker, because in this particular instance here, as relates to Head 37, the variation is actually quite larger than what was normally have been the case. And I anticipate, sir, that based on the review between the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, that the variation appears to have been in part with respect to the reconciliation between the number of officers who were intended to be appointed versus who were temporary, and therefore we had to continue to pay until that was resolved. So I just want the public to be aware that what we are voting here actually is not related, and I accept that we still have some issues to resolve, Mr. Chairman, in terms of when authorities expire and those types of internal administrative matters for ministries, and therefore we are provisioning here for what has already been paid to officers, and in this case it will be teachers under the Ministry of Education, but we have given a commitment that we will review the internal processes with respect to those officers who are temporary and where the authorities are not updated as efficiently as we can, as efficient as they should be, and therefore over the course of the next fiscal year we hope to have an intervention in place that will not see the kind of anxiety and uncertainty with respect to those officers that come into the service new, so to speak, and continue to experience some of those issues. And of course, sir, it speaks as well to and naturally, once you make those allowances, with respect to national insurance contributions are equally paid on time as well, and therefore we're just bringing into account what has already transpired during the course of the year. But I hope that by the end of April, we shall have all of these matters resolved between Public Service and the Ministry and the Treasury and the Ministry of Finance to make sure then that we can reconcile these matters as urgently as possible. So with those very, very few words, sir, I beg to move that head 87, stand part.
I beg to second that, sir.
Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hear the explanation of the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central with respect to this, the sums requested under this head for the Ministry of Education. I am not clear, though, from the presentation whether the reference to the recently created posts of janitor and general worker in the primary schools, I gather, whether that the explanation that was offered also accounts for the explanation that is given here. In other words, the presentation that makes reference to bringing to account retroactive salaries or bringing to account in a retroactive fashion this payment of salaries, whether this funding for recently created janitor and general worker posts explains that, or whether there have in fact been recently created janitor and general worker posts under the nursery and primary sub-program in the Ministry of Education. So I wasn't clear on that. And the reason I raise it is that in 2008, 2009, the government of Barbados went through a process where we regrettably saw the separation from work of certain categories, people who worked in certain categories. So the question that I have is whether these are newly created posts, because some of those people who are separated from their work would have fit under these categories of work, or whether this is just really an exercise of making good certain things that were not properly done, as sometimes happens. So that's the question that I have. But the more substantive issue that I want to raise has to do with the prioritization of roles within this nursery and primary sub-program. This is a sum of over $8.5 million that is going to retroactive pay for watchmen for minimum wage, as it says here, which absolutely should be done, but also makes reference to these janitor and general worker posts. I don't know if it is a situation that because children are back in schools and because we still have to be very watchful with respect to COVID, whether these positions are now required. I would love to have an explanation on that. But the greater point really has to do with nursery and the capacity of the education system to accommodate children in nursery schools. It is a perennial problem. And I am reflecting the concern that has been shared with me by many of my constituents as recently as this morning, that some of their efforts to get their children into nursery schools do not bear fruit, in part because there are not enough places, there are long waiting lists, and so on. So it begs the question about the prioritization of these resources and whether there is not scope or should not be scope to look at the issue of capacity at the nursery school level. Now, the government of Barbados said in the last term, and we said as well in the 2018 manifesto, that this is not something that a government can do alone, and that is granted. But there was meant to be an effort to collaborate with the private sector to expand the availability of nursery places, especially for those who live in and around urban St. Michael. Part of that effort was supposed to have seen collaboration with the private sector, in particular in areas where we tend to see women's labor concentrated. What used to be, and we used to have much more representation of these kinds of enterprises, call centers and so on. And the idea at the time was to collaborate with the Ministry of Industry and to make sure that there was availability of daycare, day nurseries, and so on for people to be able to return to work. This is not simply a question of having spaces, early childhood education spaces for infants to be able to start their education properly. But it's also a question of women's capacity or the primary caregiver's capacity to go back to work or to find work. And I believe that all members are aware that one of the constraints, in particular to women being able to work, is whether they can find adequate daycare facilities. So while this over $8.5 million is being allocated for this purpose, and I hear the explanation that it is retroactive, I'm not clear on whether these recently created janitor and general worker posts, not to say that there should not be janitors and general workers, but I think it's important also to acknowledge that we have made a commitment to expand nursery capacity in this country. And I wanted to know the extent to which we are going to be able to honor that commitment, if at all. Thank you, sir.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My apologies for the breakdown in the addendum. Just to make it very clear, when you recall that the order with respect to the minimum wage came into effect April 1st of 2021, and we had already made provisions, obviously, within the context of this financial year, but we recognized then that once the order came into effect, that the watchmen would need to be paid the new minimum wage, and therefore operationally within the context of the ministry's budget that was done throughout the course of the year. And the posts to which the janitors and general workers, those were actually approved in February as school returned, and there were additional sites because of a couple of primary schools, which escapes me now, where we had to operate alternative sites with respect to the provisional schooling, and therefore those 20 posts were created and approved with respect to those with respect to making educational services available to those students, those off-site facilities. As a result, 61,946,000 for not just the watchmen, but equally the general workers and the janitors for the end of the financial year is what that amounted to. And so I apologize for the way the addendum is presented, because it may give the impression that it is for all of these people, and it is indeed not the case. 8.5 million is actually with respect to the payment for the teachers within the context of the nursery and primary section. And as I said, the reconciliation between MPS and Treasury will continue to make sure that we have that properly done. Obviously, the other concerns that the member raised, obviously, the Minister of Education will have to respond to. But I think, as all members here, we share the concerns with respect to, one, the normalization of school again, and what that would mean, obviously, for the education of all of our children. And I too share some of the concerns with respect to where we are. But I know that having started in February, that we all look forward to the third term, where we can see full school resume and with very little disruption by way of COVID, so that all of our children, whether nursery, primary, secondary, can get access again to in-person education 5 days a week, 9 to 3, so that the rest of the country can get a sense of normality once again. And so with those few words, Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Head 87 stand part.
Second that, sir.
The question is that Head 87 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 92, Ministry of Energy, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, in the amount of $500,000.
Honourable member for St. James Central.
Mr. Chairman, sir, that really, that designation, I'm sure, is now Energy and Business Development, but be that as it may, sir, this sub-program with respect to the electronic single window is a very critical one in which we are seeking the sum of $500,000 to finance the commencement of the electronic single window project. It is as simple as that, sir. And obviously, to the ears of the uninitiated, the question must now be asked, what is the electronic single window project? I am happy, sir, to provide you with a very brief exposition. Sir, the reality in Barbados up until this point has been that if you are trying to do a cross-border transaction, say, for example, you're importing something into the country, you very often, sir, as a business person, have to move from one department of government to another physically in order to get the permissions and follow the regulatory requirements from department to department to department. In some cases, sir, that may involve in any given transaction as many as 7 or 8 stops, and you're going from place to place during the course of a business day. It means that the entrepreneur or the person representing the entrepreneurial endeavor spends precious time back and forward through traffic, spends precious money in order to be able to complete the transaction at the regulatory level. We, sir, are trying to now come to a point where importation and indeed exportation from this country is substantially simplified, allowing the business people in Barbados, sir, for the first time in the history of this country, to have a facility whereby they go online and they are able to meet all of the regulatory requirements in one place, in an interactive space online, so that they are able, at the touch of the mouse, to complete those regulatory requirements and either import into the country those things that need to be imported in pursuance of their business endeavor, or export from the country those things that we need to be exported so as to earn the foreign exchange that the country must have. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, Mr. Chairman, sir, the benefits really are that you are, in this effort, going to onboard as many as 28 government departments onto this electronic single window. So you would, for example, be onboarding obviously customs and excise, because they are critical parts of the process. You would be onboarding, Mr. Speaker, sir, the Royal Barbados Police Force, the Barbados Police Service, the Defense Force. I'm not going to try to rattle off all of them, Mr. Speaker, sir, Mr. Chairman, sir, but if you think about it, for example, in any part of the exercise, invariably the Ministry of Agriculture, through a number of its departments, plays a critical role, whether it be for sanitary and phytosanitary purposes, so as to ensure that we don't import pests and that type of thing into the country. Equally, Mr. Chairman, the Plant and Quarantine Department plays a very important role. The ministry or the division within the Ministry of Energy and Business Development, that division called the Division of Commerce, or the Department of Commerce rather, plays a very important regulatory role, and we can go on and on. As I said, there are about 28 government agencies that will be onboarded during the course of the next couple of years, so as to make sure that this one-stop shop will be an environment within which business people can seamlessly interface with government meet the regulations that the state must maintain for the safety of the country and the well-being of its people, but at the same time, substantially accelerate the pace at which we do business. We are, sir, also going to benefit from this electronic single window by harmonizing data so that you will have high-speed electronic filing of documents by all of the relevant government departments. And critical to this, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that all stakeholders who are involved in the business of cross-border financial and commercial activity stand to benefit from that electronic filing of documents process and harmonization of data. It is also important, Mr. Chairman, for us to be able to disseminate regulatory information so that a change in the regulatory requirements at the Ministry of Agriculture can easily then be communicated to the Division of Commerce, can equally easily be communicated, sir, to any other department of government, so that online and equally, last but not least, the consumer and when I say consumer, the stakeholder, the entrepreneur, everybody must be equally aware at any given time in this business as to what the regulatory requirements are, how they may have been adjusted, and that information be found in one known location at any given point of time. So the dissemination of the information is absolutely critical. Equally important, sir, is the coordination of central functions with regard to regulatory authorities, so that as part of this, we must all coordinate that which we do together. And, sir, I could not end this without saying that another benefit of the electronic single window is the reduction of costs to stakeholders. I don't think there's anybody in Barbados who would argue that this country is exceptionally concerned about the soaring cost of living, and the electronic single window, sir, speaks to the question of reduction of costs in many ways. The most obvious is that if I no longer have to drive to 8 different physical locations in Barbados to get 8 different permissions to do one transaction cross-border, it saves me substantial time, and therefore it saves me, and in the process, substantial amounts of money, to put it as we will put it on the street, sir, but in bulk from place to place to look after the regulatory requirements of the government. I think, Mr. Chairman, that in a nutshell, this electronic single window project will bring increased confidence to civil society, on the part of civil society, and that they will have that confidence, sir, to say and see that government is using its resources to ensure improvement in the quality of governance in Barbados generally, and improvement in the facilitation of business more specifically. I took the opportunity, sir, to elaborate as a minister responsible for business development must do, in my judgment, so that you will understand, sir, the importance and the significance of this electronic single window project. This is about providing now the professional services that will be required in order to let the project officially start to function in an effective way. We have identified a space, sir, in the Baobab Towers, I believe, which will be the home of the project unit. And as you will recall, Mr. Chairman, when UNCTAD took place here last year, I signed the agreement documents with the Secretary General of UNCTAD, which began the working relationship with the government and people of Barbados. So to UNCTAD, sir, I would want to take this opportunity also to signal my gratitude for their support, both technical and financial. And, sir, they obviously are the leads on this consultancy. And with their assistance, we would anticipate that within the next several months, we will be in a position to bring this painful and torturous experience on the part of the people of this country to an end, and they will have an electronic single window within which they can interface seamlessly, expedite their business interests, sir, and at the same time save themselves considerable amounts of money. I am obliged to you. I beg to move that Head 92 stand part.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important that we are all reminded that these matters are important to the public of Barbados and require the full elaboration. So I thank the Minister the member for St. James Central, for taking the time to explain the project. We are aware that it is very important. It is something, as he intimated, that has been discussed for a few years, certainly as part of the doing business agenda. And so it is critical, as his presentation highlighted, that these matters are urgently addressed. I rise, though, in support of the supplementary request to use the opportunity to point out a couple related matters. The member spoke about the issue of the harmonization of data and the harmonization of systems. And so I rise with a bit of a caution as the project is being rolled out. It in its name talks about having a single window, which is a single process or a single space for these matters to be addressed. But I think that the work also needs to talk to whatever are the existing systems across government as well as in the private sector that will mean that it functions well. And this is why I've said this. We have been plagued is the word I use, across government with sets of systems that either are not the optimal use, the optimal software, the optimal program for what we're doing, or we decide that we are going to find someone far away, and the nature of the contract is that in order for us to do anything with the program, we have to fly them in at whatever cost to the people of Barbados. We have gone through many scenarios where we have not optimized or we have not been most efficient in terms of how we choose and execute these kinds of platforms and these kinds of systems. I have every confidence that under the members' stewardship, that will not happen in this case. But I raise it as something that we have to be cautious about. Not only that when the electronic single window is rolled out, by its very name and its very nature, it must communicate within itself, but it also has to communicate with some existing programs that we have. And I am raising the flag now to make sure that not just the ministry for which the member is responsible, but the other ministries, for example, the one for which the member for St. Michael North is responsible, and others that will have to engage the Ministry of Finance, Customs, and so on, to make sure that these systems talk to each other, because it sounds like something that is administrative or academic, but it costs money whenever we don't do it properly. The second point has to do with new technology that we bring on stream. And I am forced, I'm afraid, to raise again the issue of KIPO and how that is being rolled out. This morning, I also had the occasion to have a conversation with my very good friend, the member for Christchurch West, who has also just helped roll out the e-planning system for town planning that we spent many months working on. And the question that I raise now is the extent to which these systems are functional and practical for the people who have to use them. Now, I understand that there are going to be growing pains and there are going to be teething issues. But I also think that there has to be a system through which the client is not at a disadvantage because of the way we choose to go about rolling out a particular system. So, for example, in the case of KIPO, where there's not a form that is made available online for whatever reason, and a client has to say, well, I'm going to need to bring this form in to the desk, then there has to be a stream, a parallel stream, which is just as analog, so that I can go back to a system of walking in if your online system has a bug or does not work. And similarly, for town planning, the member and I spoke about it this morning, but the the fact is that we also have to understand who is using these systems. Now, I may put in an application in my name. Mr. Chair, you may put in an application in your name, but you're not the one that's going to town planning to deal with building starts and to deal with certificates of compliance and so on. That is your agent. And so your agent has to have a way to be able to use your application number or to have a particular code or something that enables the individual to go in and do business in your name. Now, it requires that we understand the step-by-step process that is involved in doing business in these particular scenarios, and that we use it to create whatever it is that we need to create. But to go back to a very basic turn of phrase, time is money. And so every time we have to pause or come offline or bring new functionality, that is a cost, not just to the government of Barbados and therefore to the people of Barbados, but also to the clients who are waiting on us to be able to do their business. My final reflection on this, sir, has to do with another point raised by the member, which is the dissemination of data. Now, over the last few days, I have been doing some work that has called for the use of very large data sets from other countries. And I have gone onto a platform and clicked a button and downloaded those data sets and have been using them to do some analysis that hopefully is going to make people's lives easier in another part of the world. If I want to do that in Barbados, well, I don't think I can. There are sets of data, for example, information on trade, capital flows of goods and services across borders. There's information that is critical for people to be able to do work. But not only that, there's information that, if it is made available, can also in itself create an industry of data mining and data analysis that would see some young people in Barbados have new careers and have jobs and have work to do. And so the issue of what we do with information, regrettably, I'm afraid that we have a culture here where information is mine. I made it, I generated it, I did the survey, I collected it, I'm keeping it, even within the government. So I hope that when the member speaks about the dissemination of data within agencies, but also between the government and other users of data, that this is something that we're able to really see happen, because I don't think, well, I know that this government has nothing to hide. And I think that while we are a small population, and issues of making sure information is anonymous will come up, there are solutions for that. And so I simply use this opportunity to give a few cautions and to highlight a few opportunities that this project might create, but similarly, that any future projects of this nature might wish to consider. I thank you.
Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you, Chair. I rise to support what is before the Honourable Chamber and in support of the remarks that were made by the Honourable Member for St. James Central and the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central. The issue of the electronic single window is an extremely welcome change to the whole landscape of business in Barbados. The ability of an individual to be able to complete a transaction with one stop, I cannot begin to explain how invaluable that is to small business people. One of the challenges that small businesses have, Mr. Chairman, is the fact that they do not have a lot of staff They do not have specialists attached to their companies that they can easily send a specialist to engage a government institution to ensure that they meet their regulatory obligations, to make sure that they understand what is required of them, and to be able to execute what is required of them. And the challenge of having to leave your business for several hours, go and stand in one line, and God help you if you do not understand the number of steps in the process. You go to an institution where they tell you, but you should have gone to this other institution first and then bring the paper to us, and then we will take the paper, you will come back for it, and then you'll take it to somewhere else. It is one of the most frustrating processes for small businesses in this country, and is one of the most discouraging aspects of doing business in Barbados. And the end result, sir, is that you find that you have a number of businesses, small businesses, good ideas, but they do not want to engage the formal system because it's too complicated, it's too demanding, and very often it may cause them to fail. It makes them feel, Mr. Chairman, that the government is against them, that only certain people get through in this country, that only certain people are welcome in the business environment. And one of the things that we have promised as a government is that we are here to end franchise and to increase the involvement of all persons in whatever is happening in Barbados. It has been said that we are all to share the burden, but then we are all to share the bounty. We can only share the bounty if we make it easy for people to engage the process that they can get at that bounty. And that is what this is part of today. That's why I'm so pleased and so happy that the ministry has been able to start the necessary work in terms of putting the plan together, that the money is going to be made available, that we're going to be able to set up a team to help us put it in place, and it will help transform what is going on in this country in terms of access. One of the negative impacts of people not being able to engage all of the places that they need to go to is that they remain uncompliant. They therefore don't meet obligations. And every now and again you would know that we would have the Ministry of Finance having to get up to give forgiveness for doing this and forgiveness for doing that, because a lot of the small businesses in our country are not able to engage those formal things and make sure that they're compliant with their regulatory obligations. It isn't only that they remain uncompliant, they also remain ignorant sometimes of the benefits that can be derived from engaging, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, engaging the provisions that have been made for them. Just this morning, the Honourable Member for St. James Central and myself had the honour and pleasure to be at the opening of the Business Expo, which brought together all the units within the ministry to be able to share with business people what are some of the services and supports which we offer. We were also able to give space to small businesses to be able to showcase themselves. And believe me, there are a lot of very innovative small businesses seeking to work within our environment. And so having this electronic single window is only one part of the tremendous work that the ministry is going to be doing in order to help bring hundreds of businesses from out of the shadows, and more importantly, position them that we can help them to grow and develop. I welcome this too because of the challenge we have, because of that tremendous wall of distrust that has grown up in this country over the years. And I am praying that as people listen to what we put on the table, the services that we're offering, that we will gradually break down that wall of distrust that is there. And that it will enable us then as a country to work together to be able to lift Barbados from out of its economic challenges and to be able to forge together as a nation to be able to position Barbados for prosperity in the future. So, Mr. Chairman, with those few words, I just want to commend this as well, give it the necessary support, and to really congratulate the ministry on being able to get us to this stage and to take it further. I thank you.
Honourable member for St. James Central.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the honourable members who contributed to this debate, in particular the honourable member for St. Michael South Central, who raised a number of very critical points. And I want to assure my honourable friend that they have not fallen on deaf ears. In fact, sir, her contribution is extremely worthwhile because of the fact that it allows for this Parliament to reflect on the fact that it was in 2005, during the previous Labour Party administration, that this matter first raised its head. And it is therefore nothing that we as a country should feel proud about, that it has taken us roughly 17 years to come hither. But this is one of the things that we have had to confront as a new administration. One of the other challenges, sir, quite frankly, is that we have taken a long time as a country to settle, as this administration has had to do under the initial leadership of the honourable member for St. George South, the political support and management for this electronic single window process. When you look at what has happened around the world, there are 4 key criteria with regard to this. There has to be a clear commitment on the part of the political leadership, the relevant ministry that will take charge. There must be political management of it. There must, sir, be an appropriate model that we will follow. And we have decided, as I indicated to you, sir, that UNCTAD will be our consultant, and we will use their model of doing this. And Mr. Chairman, sir, third, there must be a settlement of the core agencies that will participate. It may surprise you, sir, had at one stage 21, then another stage 24, now we're at 28 government agencies that are being brought on board in this exercise. And the reality is, sir, that we want it to be, as the Honourable member for St. Michael South Central has urged us to do, be as comprehensive as possible in support of the final argument, which is critical to this, and which is where her input is located. That is that we have the appropriate supporting technology. Having identified over painstaking years, 15 long years, 17 years, the agencies to be brought on board, we must now make sure that every one of those agencies has within its ambit and jurisdiction the relevant technology and access to these necessary platforms to harness the information which is critical for the process so that we can harmonize that data and to disseminate that data in an appropriate way. And the critical point that the honourable member has made, sir, as I said, cannot be lost on us, because this will fail if we do not get the data collection, the data sharing, and the necessary platforms that each entity must have right. And that is the only way then that a consumer or an investor can have confidence in the process here in Barbados, because they are requiring that, or they're expecting that at each stage, each one of those 28 possible stops, there will be an equality of access to information, an equality of treatment of the information, and an equality of benefit and opportunity for them as a player in the system. If there is ever a time that the saying a chain is as strong as its weakest link is relevant, it is in this exercise. And I therefore am once again indebted to the honourable member for St. Michael South Central for her contribution in this regard, sir. And I want to give the House the assurance that as we go forward, we will make sure that we walk hand in hand with all the relevant government departments over the course of the next several months of implementing this process. Not the least of which must be the Ministry of Finance, because several of the departments, sir, will require the necessary funding in order to make sure that they can access the relevant platforms. I am obliged to you, sir.
Honourable member moving ahead.
Beg to move that head, what is this? Sorry, sir, head 92 stand part.
The question is that head 92 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 93, sir. Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance in the amount of $5 million.
Honourable member for St. George North, St. George South, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Chamber. Am I right to speak on this supplementary, some $5 million allocated to the rental costs for accommodation for government entities. Mr. Chair, this will take us to the end of the financial year for rental accommodation, some $5 million. But I wish to just bring to the Chamber the whole aspect of allocating funds for rental of government buildings and for government accommodations, including central government and state-owned entities. The cost monthly is roughly around $5.2 million. And as we see here, we are allocating $5 million to close off the financial year. But more importantly, if you extrapolate that or if you calculate it to an annual year, a financial year, you will see that the rental cost for accommodation is over 60 million Barbados dollars. And that is by no means 2 cents in Bajan terms. And government is working assiduously to reduce the rental costs or cost of the accommodation. And in 2020, since coming to office, this government embarked on a rejuvenation project where we took 9 government agencies, including state-owned entities, and we allocated some $50 million to bring these disused properties back into some level of respectability from 2020 to present. And I'm proud to report that we have completed 3 out of the 9 buildings, that being the SSA building at Vaucluse, the Gatehouse building, the former Barbados Water Authority headquarters, and also the Bridgetown Welfare Department. And the member for St. Michael South is pleased to know that him and I will be having a handing over ceremony for that welfare building in Country Road. And I think he's a happy man this morning to know that we have completed that building within budget and on time. We also have started the refurbishment of the former registration department in Supreme Court building, and we're expected to complete that by the end of October this year. The other buildings include Block C Garrison, which is the former Tongue and Country Planning building by the Garrison, Bico building, which is Magazine Lane, and the warehouse building at former BWA headquarters, and the former Trade and Commerce building at Reef Road. So we are working as a government to ensure that this high accommodation and rental bill of some 60 million is arrested in a way that we can cut it by half by refurbishing and rejuvenating the disused buildings that we have. Mr. Chairman, it is by no means easy when we look at $60 million that we believe can be allocated to other projects, the electronic single windows, increased trade, small businesses, and we're paying so much money in accommodation for rentals when we can refurbish our buildings, and that is one of the mandates of the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, and of course this government, to ensure that the disused buildings and accommodation, former accommodations for government and state-owned entities are brought back to some level of respectability, that we can ensure that monies are put to other use than high rental costs. So with those few words, Mr. Chair, I beg to move that head 93, the sum of $5 million stand par.
The question is that head 93 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do not report progress to His Honor the Speaker.
Passing.
Sorry, the passing of one money resolution in committee.
The question is that I do now report progress, the passing of one bill in committee, one resolution in committee. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Breaking.
The chairman of committees has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee. One money resolution.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution be read a first time.
The question is that this resolution be read a first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. All against, please say nay. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution be read a second time.
The question is that this resolution be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. All against, please say nay. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution be now agreed to.
The question is that this resolution be read a third time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. All against, please say nay. I think the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed.
Order number 4, sir. In the name of the Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries' Remuneration and Allowances Order 2022.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the resolution to approve the Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries' Remuneration and Allowances Order 2022. Notice wasn't given? Notice was.
Order number 4 once again, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the House, to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries' Remuneration and Allowances Order 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chair. Mr. Deputy Chair, this is a rather straightforward resolution seeking Parliament's approval to amend the schedule to the Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries Conditions of Service Order 2022 to make provision for the senior ministers to be, which the Prime Minister would have announced at her address to the nation shortly after the general election, I believe on about the 24th of January, indicating that not only was she downsizing the cabinet of Barbados, but she was also seeking to, in a sense, allow other persons to do some of the heavy lifting. I think it is fair to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we have seen not only from January of this year, but we've seen from the time that this administration came to office, a certain measure of alacrity in relation to trying to stabilize the economy. We have seen that the hand that we had been dealt required of not only the Honourable Prime Minister, but certainly all of the members of the government, a commitment and dedication to ensuring that we were able to keep the country not only safe, but to stay the course and to ensure that we were able to get back to what I consider to be a time where Barbados is able to punch above its weight yet again. In fairness to the Honourable Prime Minister, I think that in making that decision, I think it was perhaps a recognition of the amount of work that the first few years in office from 2018 would have resulted in on her, and certainly it took a toll on her. I think we've all seen the grey hair, not only on the Honourable Attorney General who sits next to me, but certainly on all Honourable members who would have been extremely close to her during those early periods, as well as the economic team as well, who would have had to keep Barbados afloat. And so I believe that in making the announcement that not only that for the first time for some time there would be a Deputy Prime Minister, but also that there would be an additional 4 senior ministers to support the Prime Minister in being able to manage the affairs of the country, was an indication and a recognition by the Prime Minister that many hands really do make light work. Even as we speak, Mr. Deputy Chair, the Honourable Prime Minister is not on island. She is actually in Dubai. I just had a quick chat with her, reporting significant progress and excitement, certainly in relation to a number of meetings being held there. Again, looking and seeking investment for this country, because we cannot obviously behave as though we operate within a vacuum, but we must ensure that while we try to hold strain in these markets, that we have a responsibility as well to open up the markets both in the region but also internationally as well. And so the Honourable Prime Minister, in making the announcement for the senior ministers, indicated that the following ministers would be elevated to the position of senior minister. Those persons have included the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, who heads the Infrastructure Committee and who is the minister responsible for ensuring that we are able to move a number of these significant projects that we have on the priority agenda forward, to ensure that various government departments are able to respond in a timely manner, so that the extreme frustration that has been experienced by a number of developers, a number of private individuals, a number of companies across this country, a number of foreign investors, that we are able to alleviate a lot of the time that it takes to do business in Barbados. Because if we are to be competitive, then we need to ensure that there's somebody coming to work every single day to ensure that the business of the government is being done and that the business of investment is being done. The other appointment, Mr. Deputy Chair, has been the appointment of the Honourable Attorney General, who is also the Senior Minister coordinating government policy. It goes without saying that throughout the last few years, and in particular during the pandemic, that the early period of the pandemic, the Honourable Attorney General and his staff have worked tirelessly to be able to deliver not only legislation in a pandemic environment, but to ensure that all government ministries were able to stay on top of the things that matter to Barbadians. And I believe, as I said earlier, we have seen the graying of the hair. We even saw at one point the extended beard also coming on the Honourable Attorney General, which I suspect was a sign of tiredness, but certainly remaining steadfast in his approach to the business of the day. And I can be open with the country. I mean, every week at Cabinet, we are required to examine the legislation in our various ministries. We have also rescheduled the way in which we approach the business of Parliament. The Honourable Attorney General is responsible for also ensuring that legislation is obviously coming at a speed that allows for government policy to be implemented in a timely manner. And for that, Mr. Speaker, it again reiterates the importance of having someone coming to work every single day to do specific tasks if we are to be able to crawl ourselves out of what we have been in for the last few years. The other honourable member who has been elevated to senior minister is the honourable member for Christ St. James Central, who is responsible for the productive sectors. He's no stranger to certainly the Ministry of Tourism. He, as being the former minister, well aware of the other areas in terms of agriculture and business, and trying to ensure that obviously we're able to release and to ensure that the business of making sure that things in this country happen faster, that those are provided the necessary oversight by the Honourable Minister as we go forward as well. The Most Honourable Jerome Walcott, Senator Jerome Walcott, Senator the Most Honourable, Senator Dr. the Most Honourable Jerome Walcott, as well has been elevated to this position. He too is with the Prime Minister currently on government business, again representing Barbados in terms of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but on a wider front, Senator Walcott has been at the forefront of the COVID-19 pandemic as chair of the Cabinet Subcommittee, ensuring that we were able to again steer the country to safety, and again has shared in that responsibility, particularly in the social sectors, and that is the area that the Prime Minister has requested of him to pretty much shadow and to ensure that all of those various ministries report to him and make life a little easier, not only for the ministers and the ministries, but certainly for the Prime Minister as well in terms of the management. The toll has therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, not been an easy one, and even as people look on Barbados, I think it is clear that we've done exceptionally well in terms of being able to get to this point. But the truth is that we are not going to be able to get further if we do not have everybody coming to work on the same page, trying to make sure that there is growth. And I think at the forefront of everything that we've been trying to do and why we've had to reorganize the way in which the Cabinet works, and certainly senior ministers are now to come to work to address the affairs of the country, is really because there is a recognition that we have to be more clinical in the approach to the affairs of government, and it is therefore not business as usual. So for those who believe that, or who believe that the Cabinet was too large, the truth of the matter is that we have made compensation in one respect, but that we continue to justify that it was necessary at the time because of the magnitude of the work that had to be done. Now we have come again to government and basically revisited that initial position, but said simply that we need to have another cadre of another level of ministers, along with the Deputy Prime Minister, being in a position to be able to hold other ministries to account, to be able to share some of the work with the Honourable Prime Minister in being able to execute the mandate of this administration. Just to give some background, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as well, because I think it is important to know that the position of senior minister was previously held by Dame Billy Miller. Dame Billy would have been the Deputy Prime Minister at one point under the former Barbados Labour Party administration. She would have held the post from 1994 until 2003. And then she was appointed senior minister in 2003 when the current Prime Minister would have taken up the position. I believe it was then felt by the Honourable leader at the time, O.N.C. O'More Arthur, that it was necessary to ensure that she was not affected in terms of that salary structure which she had become accustomed to, and therefore arrangements were made to maintain her not only at the level of DPM but also at the level of senior minister. And so what is reflected in the resolution today, therefore, speaks to the fact that since that period of time when Dembele would have held the position of senior minister, there had been no further appointments to this particular post. What we therefore seek to do today is to recognize and to acknowledge the announcement made by the Honourable Prime Minister, but further to assure the country that with these particular changes, it is our intention to be able to drill down to where the bottlenecks are within government and to work collectively and assiduously to ensure that we are able to carry out the mandate of this current administration. Already, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think it is important to note here that we are not senior ministers in any way or deputy prime minister in name only, but the truth is that those initial meetings have already started where we meet regularly to look at the priority agenda of government, to look at the priorities in each of the respective ministries, and to pretty much hold to account each of the respective ministers and the public servants in being able to execute government's agenda. And so that will continue both in Prime Minister's presence and certainly in Prime Minister's absence, because we are very clear as to the promises that we have made as a government. We are clear as to the targets that we must meet in terms of growth, and therefore we meet regularly in order to be able to fulfill the agenda of this administration. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have no intention of detaining the House any further. Suffice to say that this reflects yet another initiative on this administration to be able to improve the efficiency of government. We can't be telling the public servants that they must improve at their end and they must do all the restructuring within their departments, and equally within the cabinet. It still looks as though it is a cabinet of 2 decades ago. And therefore, these are but just a few changes that we have started to make, and I'm sure you are well aware that we will come to the point very shortly in relation to parliamentary reform and certainly wider constitutional reform. A country cannot remain in a state of pause. And therefore, while some of the decisions that we make may go against the grain or against what has traditionally been the norm, the truth of the matter is that just as the tide flows in and the tide flows out, equally as a government who is responsive and listening to the people of this country, we have a responsibility as well to try different things in order to be able to manage this country effectively. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I wanted to lend my voice to this resolution because I think that the matter of the governance of the country is very important, and to the extent that there are changes to the structure of governance, that it bears discussion in this honourable place. Now, I do believe that there is a need for coordination across the various sectors in which the government works. I don't know if the 4 ministers who have been chosen would consider themselves elevated, as the word that we heard in the presentation, because it means for them quite a bit more work. But I think that we do need, in our service to the people of the country, we need to look at the issue of coordination of how that work is done. I agree with the member for St. Michael Southeast who presented this resolution that there is a lot of heavy lifting. And I think that this is not the occasion to get into a discussion of the value of the work that ministers do. I don't think that this country will ever reach consensus on that question. But I think that it is a time to look beyond the individual roles and to look at whether the systems exist for this coordination to happen. Now, I do not want to seem unsupportive of the measure, but I always am wary of the habit of throwing people at problems. I think that we have to get past the notion that if there's something to fix, you identify a person and you have that person be assigned to fix it. Now, that might be a necessary condition, but most of the time is not a sufficient condition. So yes, we have senior ministers with coordinating functions, but what does that coordination look like? The real function of coordination really must happen in a meaningful way at the level of the ministry, at the level of the departments, at the level of the same systems that we spoke of earlier today when the member for St. James Central introduced the supplementary on the electronic single window. Now, some months ago, the government engaged in something called a commitment for results project or pilot or exploration. And one of the things which I thought was a very worthwhile exercise, and I hope it continues, I saw the Honourable Prime Minister make reference to it the other day and give the assurance that it will continue and that it will come to fruition. But during that exercise of having this results-based approach to what we do, this commitment for results approach to what we do, one of the things that as we sat with officers and went through the exercise to settle this commitment for results approach, one of the things that was made clear in that exercise was that one of the chief reasons for failure in governments across the world, in large corporations across the world, has to do not necessarily with the people, but with the systems, and whether there are real systems that exist to allow the things that we want done to be done, whether people are measuring results, whether people are measuring performance. Because certainly the number of reports written or the number of cabinet papers written is not a result. Are we really measuring the impact on people's lives? And it's not easy to measure that. But again, I find myself having to caution us all that simply having an individual, a role, a function that is called senior minister might be a necessary condition, but it certainly is not sufficient. And we need to be able to move to the place where we have coordinating systems, including data sharing across ministries, including making sure that when we leave meetings, work is being done. Because with all due respect to the systems of government that we have come to know, a meeting is not a result, and a meeting is not a management function. Because when you leave those meetings, somebody has to go back and do some work that is actually going to make a difference in somebody's life. I support the areas that have been identified for coordination. So forgive me if I am not enamored of the senior minister notion. I am more enamored of the function of coordination. That really has to happen at the level of the ministry. That really has to happen between town planning and environmental protection and building standards and housing and across functions of ministries, and not necessarily at the level of cabinet. Members of cabinet talk to each other all the time. So I'm more curious to hear what are the systems, and I don't mean meetings, what are the systems, what are the platforms, what are the points of data sharing that are going to mean that what is here in this resolution actually makes a difference to the quality of governance in this country. I support the infrastructure coordination function. I in particular support the governance coordination function because I think that there are, whether it is reform on the rights of the child and other human rights issues, whether it is looking at the issues of how our police engage with the public, and really looking at what are the organs and the roles of the police department that are going to mean that we have a more meaningful engagement with the public across the area of governance. There are issues to be addressed and gaps to be filled. Similarly, for the issue of coordination across social ministries, and obviously for the productive sectors. But my only caution is that this is not going to go where we want it to go. This is not going to have the results that we anticipate unless we realize that it cannot just be about identifying for people. It has to be about strengthening the systems that exist in the public service to be able to address and properly coordinate for results and for impact. Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central for her contribution. I believe having held the role of responsibility for not only business facilitation, but also responsibility over town and country planning, and certainly leading certainly many delegations in relation to the economic team, bringing us through what I believe was some of our darkest hours. She better than anybody else knows the difficulties that we have in being able to not only have meetings, but have meetings that where there is follow through. So I think the point is well taken. I do believe, though, that it is a little bit too early to diagnose this problem and say that perhaps the ministers may not be able to wrestle the issues to the ground. And that's why I set out the structure in terms of how we are meeting, how we are discussing the issues, reporting back to the Prime Minister, trying to look at the bottlenecks and trying to make the changes that are necessary. In many cases, I think the issue for us is, as usual, the issue of the reforms that are necessary, trying to make sure that things happen faster. That takes time, but it doesn't mean that ministers cannot stay on top of issues and cannot follow through with PSs or follow through with staff within internal ministry. And that certainly is what we've been doing. Where we have found that there have been those bottlenecks, we've tried to engage with the various parties, but also bring to bring other ministries into the fold to be able to wrestle those issues to the ground. And I think a lot of times there's this phrase that we say where a lot of government departments operate in silos, and that is where we complain for it all the time. But the truth is that now we have responsibility for being able to tackle that frontally to be able to make those changes. Truth be told, are things always going to move as fast as we would like? We have inherited a system which we are trying our best to change, and I know all colleagues share in the concerns of how sometimes things move a little bit too slow, especially in relation to policy and the implementation of policy. But that is why we've had to employ this type of structure to be able to help us to drill down what those issues are and to try to resolve that as well. Yes, I do feel that the Honourable Ministers believe that it is an elevation. I think while we do not like to speak to the fact that, you know, when we touch anything to do with salaries, nobody likes to go there because there's a feeling that politicians have too much. But I have seen my colleagues work hard. I've seen the Honourable Prime Minister work hard. I've seen them continue to work hard, sir. And I am comfortable with the positions that we've taken in relation to the elevation of those ministers. I am grateful to those ministers who have come before as well, who have given their all to make sure that this country was turned around. But let us not fool ourselves. This is only going to work if everybody comes to work up to the task to be able to do what is necessary to achieve the mandate of this administration. And so I appeal, therefore, to those who have to help the Honourable Senior Ministers to be able to execute the policy, to see this as more of a progressive change than a threat to their own existing systems. And in that light, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution be read a first time. Be now passed.
The question is that this resolution be now passed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. All against, please say nay. I think the ayes have it. This resolution now stands passed.
With that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we've come to the end of today's sitting. I therefore beg to move this adjournment of the House until Tuesday, the 29th of March at 10 a.m.
Beg to second that, sir.
The question is that this House be adjourned until the 29th of March at 10 a.m. All those members in favor, please say aye. All against, please say nay. I think the ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned until the 29th of March at 10 a.m. sharp. Thank you.